Lately, everyone is talking about the BRICS currency.
Let's talk about BRICS.
Creation of a common currency for trade among the BRIC countries.
Looking into an alternative currency to the US dollar.
Many say it could potentially become the new global currency, replacing the US dollar. And if it happens, it will impact both the American economy and the life of pretty much every person far beyond the US. Are you curious to see the bill of the main competitor of the dollar? I'll gladly show it, but I can't because the BRICS currency doesn't exist yet. And this is the interesting part. Why do so many people panic if this currency isn't even out yet? Can it really reshape the global order? What is BRICS in the first place? It started as BRIC in 2001. Back then, British economist Jim O'Neill grouped Brazil, Russia, India, and China to highlight their economic potential. Later, in 2010, the four countries had their first summit and formed an official organization. The same year, South Africa joined. And that was when the BRICS we know today emerged. The common goal of the new bloc was to create an economy counterweight to the Old West, basically Europe and the US, and also to change the world economic order. But is BRIC really that powerful? According to Statista.com, its founding nations account for over 40% of the world's population. These numbers owe a lot to China and India, each being home to 1.4 billion people. Another reason to take BRICS seriously is its global market share. The combined GDP of this organization is $26 trillion, which is a quarter of the world's economy. Yet, BRICS mainly owes this indicator to China, as it is twice as big as all other countries of the bloc combined. The third reason for BRICS' power might lie in its political influence. Even though Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa aren't part of the G7, they belong to G20. Besides, BRICS might be expanding soon, as lately many countries express interest in joining the bloc. South African officials say that there are 40 potential candidates. At the same time, Goldman Sachs predicts that these countries can create the most powerful economic system by 2050. In the 2000s, the BRICS countries emerged as the fastest growing markets, and now their economic influence can soon surpass the G7. China and India can become dominant suppliers of industrial goods and services, while Russia and Brazil the main providers of raw material. One of the other BRICS achievements was the establishment of its own bank called the New Development Bank, with an initial capital of $50 billion. Its president, Dilma Rousseff, says that by 2026, 30% of the bank's loans will be issued in national currencies. In her view, this will contribute to de-dollarization. While the BRICS currency doesn't exist yet, the BRICS countries don't waste time and promote their own national currencies in the meantime. Still, according to IMF data, the results are rather modest so far because almost 2/3 of global currency reserves are in dollars, a fifth in euros, and 5% in British pounds. No matter how much China tries to increase its trade in yuan, its currency accounts for less than 3% of global reserves. If you want to learn more details about why the Chinese yuan can't replace the US dollar, feel free to check out this video. And now, back to the BRICS currency. Should we even be concerned about it? Why would people in the US care about what's going on the other side of the world? The answer is short. Because the popularity of the dollar ensures stable growth of the American economy. And if this popularity decreases, the consequences for the US will be inevitable. Since the dollar became the global currency after World War II, foreign governments began to trade in dollars and accumulate them to limit financial risk. And this started a whole change of processes. For example, many countries globally invest their excess reserve into the US Treasury securities to make their money's worth. This way, as the global economy grows, the demand for dollars also increases. Thus, foreign currency reserves flow back into the US economy. Besides, the US also lends money to governments of other countries, and the interest they pay contributes to the income of the American government and citizens. That's why the popularity of the dollar is a guarantee of American prosperity. But does the greenback dominance benefit other countries? And if so, why? Nations with unstable economies hold their savings in dollars because it is one of the ways to safeguard money from inflation. But could the BRICS currency ensure similar stability? Unlikely. The dollar's stability is primarily guaranteed by the robust American economy. At the same time, the BRICS economies are rather unstable and very different. To compensate for this and potentially surpass the dollars, BRICS countries decided to back their currency with gold. And lately, they are actively acquiring gold. Will it mitigate the instability of BRICS itself? That's an open question. But there's another issue with the BRICS currency. It is a collective project. This means that its issuers are a group of countries. Besides, they don't have the best relationship with each other, which doesn't sound like a good foundation for stability. Another problem of the BRICS currency is inflation. Using US dollars generally helps avoid inflationary risk, but the BRICS currency is unlikely to provide the same benefits. This year, the inflation in India was around 6%, almost 4% in Brazil, and 5% in South Africa. Russia and China have a more complicated situation. China is heading towards deflation, which is no good, as deflation basically means a weakening economy. Russia reports a 3.6% inflation, while the economists say that it is much higher. Most of these indicators might not seem too catastrophic, but the main challenge is to ensure that all BRICS countries have stable economies for many decades. No matter what challenges they face, BRICS countries try different options to shift power from the West. One of their initiatives was creating their own bank, but could it provide the world with inexpensive and trustworthy loans? Will other countries risk borrowing from a BRICS bank that depends on a number of countries, each with serious territorial and political claims against each other? The truth is that as long as the dollar remains the world's currency, most countries will borrow from the US simply because it works. The main question, though, is why the BRICS currency hasn't emerged yet, especially when everyone talks about it so much. The issue lies here. Now, BRICS is influential, but maybe not quite as much as expected when it just appeared. The sensational economic growth that transformed this bloc into a political force in the 2000s started slowing down around 2010. According to the economist Jim O'Neill, the one that came up with the concept of BRICS, Brazil and Russia showed a rather disappointing economic performance in the last decades. Jim O'Neill, economist, a former UK Treasury Minister. While India has notably disappointed in recent years, it is broadly developing along the path we envision. For both Brazil and Russia, however, the 2010-2020 economic performance was very disappointing, which has occasionally led me to joke that perhaps I should have called the BRICS the X. And for many years, economists are wondering if the BRICS bloc will last at all. Currently, the situations in China, India, and Brazil has slightly improved compared to the decade of the 2020, but they still didn't return to their previous growth rate. Slow economic development isn't the main problem for BRICS. The center of the issue lies inside the group. India, China, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa are hardly allies. Political experts often say that these countries have no inherent reason to support each other. Instead, they form an alliance to counter a dominant figure, the West. In essence, it is not unity for a shared cause, but rather unity against someone. All these ideological troubles can be explained by the fact that BRICS countries have more differences than commonalities. They are geographically distant and with economies at different developmental stages. Besides, their goals and visions differ significantly. As for their ideologies, according to the Democracy Index, Brazil, India, and South Africa fall under the category of flawed democracies, while China and Russia belong to authoritarian regimes. Similarly, the Global Freedom Index also shows how different BRICS countries are. Brazil and South Africa are categorized as free, India as partly free, and China and Russia belong to not free countries. Different political systems manage the economy differently, worsening the contradictions in the group. With that said, one can wonder if the BRICS countries are so diverse and therefore they want different outcomes, why in the world did each of them join BRICS? Turns out that every country has a reason. For South Africa, BRICS is a way to assert its role as an economic and political leader on the African continent. Many say that for Brazil, this is a chance to get away from the American shadow without any direct confrontation. For India, BRICS secures its role as a leader among developing nations, and for China, it is a way to overcome a superpower in opposition to the US. As for Russia, it reportedly views BRICS as a way to diminish the cultural influence of the US and Europe, what's often referred to as the Western influence. Martin Binder, professor of political science and international relations. Constructing an alternative world order where the United States and their Western allies, with their norms, rules, and institutions no longer dominate, and where developing non-Western countries play a bigger role, has always been one of the main goals of the BRICS countries. The big question, of course, is how realistic it is for these countries to build such a world order. As we can see, all of the BRICS countries want to achieve economic and political leadership in their region. The irony, though, is that often these are the same regions. India and China are the largest economies of BRICS that had fierce competition for years. China tries to settle payments in Yuan with all the allies, causing frustration for India. To lower China's influence, India even started cutting the imports of Chinese goods and banned Chinese applications like TikTok and Shein. Besides, China and India also have long-lasting territorial disputes, both claiming territories along their shared border. In 2020, this scaled into a military conflict, resulting in casualties and almost erupting into war. Also, India's official, on several occasions, mentioned that their relations with Russia are crucial for opposing Chinese aggression. This literally means that the BRICS countries are forming coalitions not only against the US, but also against each other. Russia and China have an even more complex relationship. Experts often say that China uses Russia to get its natural resources. And since 2022, the trade between countries has increased by at least 40% due to the sanctions imposed on Russia. This gave China more freedom to establish its own terms, such as using yuan for most transactions. The share of yuan in Russian exports to China increased 32-fold last year. On top of that, China has territorial claims over Russia. In February of this year, China's Ministry of Natural Resources proposed restoring Chinese names to the Russian cities located in territories that historically belonged to China. At the official level, the country's government have an agreement on shared borders, yet the issue obviously remains unresolved. Even in 2017, Russian news agency reported that China deployed its most advanced intercontinental ballistic missiles near the Russian borders. And this is the problem. All of these potential conflicts inside BRICS don't contribute to stability. Why would someone invest in the BRICS currency, knowing that the countries behind it could launch missiles at each other and maybe even start wars? That's why many have doubts about the future of the BRICS and the strength of their bond. Besides, no one actually knows if they can make other countries believe that their currency is stable. There are way too many doubts. But what would happen if the BRICS currency actually started getting popular and replaced the dollar? the world will probably find itself in a zone of turbulence. Currently, all global events affect the exchange rates of national currencies against the dollar, and the greenback is relatively stable, but the BRICS currency will probably be much more volatile, considering the instability of the BRICS member. The world would be at a point where all rules would get weaker, and creating a new order can get too complicated, as all BRICS countries have different aspirations. Besides, this will hit unstable economies much more than developed ones, like the US and European Union. Yet for now, even the BRICS countries aren't rushing to stop using the dollar. While Russia is promoting de-dollarization to bypass the sanctions imposed on it, and China is propagating BRICS ideals to strengthen its economy, Brazil and South Africa are still fully integrated into the dollar system. And frankly, all BRICS members keep their reserves in US dollars. That's why a significant weakening of the American currency would hit them very hard. Besides, paradoxically, the US remains the largest investor in BRICS countries. That's why, by weakening the dollar issuing country, BRICS might lose more than most expect. Overall, now, the prospects of the alliance against the dollar seems foggy, and the de-dollarization movement remains pretty weak so far. But we still can't ignore the fact that more and more countries trade in their national currencies, avoiding the US dollars. This won't change the economic world order in a day. Still, it might influence the dollar in the long run. And while the International Monetary Fund doesn't oppose the creation of a new international currency, it's unlikely that the BRICS will manage to replace the dollar with their currency in the near future.
The dollar is going to play the dominant role.
Do you think the BRICS currency can replace the US dollar? Share this video and your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.